come once again to discuss things.
Way too good. Alright, I'm done. Okay. Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Geeky Gentlemen History Month, the month where we discuss the history of geeky gentlemen and the contributions that they've made to history that have been ignored by a biased school system, except not at all. I am Sid Partu. Joining me today is Connor Nielsen. Hi, Connor.
Oh, how are you doing?
I'm doing good. It's good to see you. Connor is with us guesting since he got voted off of Who Reviews the Reviewers. Very unfortunate, Connor. But I'm glad to have you on.
I'm glad to be here.
Yeah. Connor does some really good stuff. I'm really curious to see what else he puts out since the contest is over for him now. And I'm subscribed. And everyone that's listening, not that you ever listen to me, people, but you should go subscribe to Connor as well. Also, Connor, I did James Bond #1 just for you today.
How was it?
What?
And how did you like it? I still haven't read it, so I own it. But
it's significantly more gory than I thought it'd be.
Oh well, Bond's not for everyone, I guess.
Yeah. So anyway, we are here to do kind of an interesting addition to History Month, and it took a little bit of arguing on Connor's part to get me to get on board with him. But so Connor, you picked the topic. What are we talking about?
All right, so I wanted to talk about an idea that's kind of been buzzing around in my head a little bit for the past couple of months. It's when does something become more important than it is good? And generally, we have, a lot of important films like Ben-Hur, Citizen Kane, Casablanca, The Godfather, and I'm kind of going to movies right now. We don't necessarily have to stay in movies, but if you're going like video games, there's Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time. If you go into comics, there's Watchmen, etc. But those are all kind of important, but they're also excellent at what they are. They're very top quality. But I feel like there are times where something is well regarded for being important and they've made their stamp on history while also not necessarily being as good. So I guess what I'm getting at is where's the line, I guess.
Or what really does do that? And I've thought about this all week or so, however long it's been since we decided on it. And I guess we'll just end the video right now and say I think the line comes between how well it holds up. Like that's my general thought is like if it holds up in quality really well, then it's good and important. But if the quality diminishes over time, then it's just more important than it is good.
That's an interesting statement because I also feel like sometimes when things are definitely a product of their time, and maybe they don't necessarily age that well, I'm trying to think of an example, but
because to me, like, I see what you're saying, because you'll have things like, what's a good, like, mid-2000s action piece?
Born
like
Supremacy.
Yeah, like, I think that's probably a really, I'm trying to think more just kind of generic, but, like the Mission Impossible movies, the early Mission Impossible movies before Tom Cruise decided he wanted a franchise again, the early Mission Impossible movies, I think they were good for their time. I think they're important because they helped fuel that, like, action craze of the 2000s in a lot of ways. But I don't think they really stand the test of time very well. And I think quality transcends time period in a way that being a product of its time doesn't for most things.
Yeah, I think you might actually be right there. Well, one of the things I've always kind of thought about is one of the things that actually kind of made me think about this was the Friday the 13th, the original film. Because That's a really bad movie. Have you ever seen it?
Yeah, once or twice. I don't know. I thought the plot twist was interesting, but it clearly wasn't meant to have sequels.
Yeah, I don't know. That whole, I mean, the ending is the best part of the film, easily, but it's really tedious. The shots linger on way too long. And anytime there's a vehicle, they're going to be over a hill before that camera cuts because it'll just follow them forever. But it's still a very important film because what it did was it managed to get a large studio, and it managed to what they did was they were able to distribute that film to a lot of theaters, and it wasn't just going to grindhouse theaters. You know, I have a bit of a respect for it, but it's still not a good movie.
Yeah, that's how I feel a lot about the first Halloween film, because I've just seen it almost created the slasher formula in a lot of ways, and I've seen so many slasher films before I'd ever watched the original Halloween, so I just don't care for it at all, but I still acknowledge that it's an important film since it was one of the things that really started that genre proper.
Wow.
And so, yeah, I have a very similar reaction to that, and I don't think that's a movie that particularly holds up, because, like, I guess when I say a movie holds up or something, I mean, like, you can watch it now and it's just as good as it was when it first came out, regardless of the historical context of it. Because, like, I can watch Rope, which is an Alfred Hitchcock movie, and to me, that's the first time I saw that, it was a great movie right away, and it's not, like, particularly important, so it's not a great example, but it was a great movie, and, you know, the setting and everything really stood the test of time, or perhaps a better example would be the first RoboCop film. I think that movie really stands the test of time because of just how it presents itself, and the quality is just as good now as it was when it came out, and there's nothing about it that really feels like it's only meant to be watched in the 80s. Like, you can't relate to it in any other time period.
All right, yeah, that's I agree. I have another interesting idea that kind of stems off of what you said about Halloween, because I do think that's a movie that mostly does hold up. When do you think something is kind of hurt by its legacy? I think that's kind of one of the things where it's very important and it's very influential, but so many things, things derive from, let's say, let's go with Dark Knight, I would not, or like Silence of the Lambs. Those two films, I feel, are a good example of an instant classic. Like, everyone loved those movies from the moment they came out, and they still do. But, let's look at, the bad guy got caught on purpose. Dun, dun, dun.
Like, oh my god, that ever since Dark Knight, every movie has used that, I swear to God.
I love Skyfall, but,
Yeah, actually, speaking of Skyfall, that's kind of my go-to, because I actually have that with movies a lot, where I will not watch it, because I just know I'm not going to enjoy it, because it's been talked up too much for me. And so for the longest time, I just didn't want to watch Skyfall, because I'd rather be the guy that hasn't seen Skyfall, as opposed to the guy who watched Skyfall and didn't enjoy it. And guess what? I watched Skyfall. It was alright. That's pretty much my consensus. I'm like, it's okay.
But I think, like, maybe in, say, 20 years or so, people will go back and watch The Dark Knight, and let's say, I think it's entirely possible that in the coming years there's going to be a lot of movies that are very derivative of Dark Knight. I mean, we even have Skyfall, which I do really like, but there's quite a bit of stuff that, even Sam Mendes has said that they were very inspired by that film.
Well, I mean, that's the thing about, these characters, is they tend to borrow from each other over time. Like, I just finished reading through Matt Wagner's run on Zorro, and a lot of it is very Batman feel. But Batman's, of course, inspired by Zorro, both in the universe of the comics and in reality was inspired by Zorro. So it's like the characters tend to borrow from each other over time, so I don't really mind that.
Yeah, and Batman and Bond have a really interesting connection over the years.
Yeah, and, so Nolan kind of just ripped off the Bond thing for Batman, and then when he did it in his own movies, people cried foul for it, so it's this weird thing. And yeah, but I do agree that a movie can certainly get hurt by its reputation, because it's for that reason that I will not watch Citizen Kane or The Godfather.
Oh, wow, because Citizen Kane's actually my favorite movie ever, and it's not just the film school answer. I think that's an excellently entertaining film. But I get what you're saying. You should really watch those two movies, because they're great.
I believe you, but I'm like, I don't want to be the guy that hates Citizen Kane and The Godfather, though. Because, like, everyone will despise me for that, and I don't want to be that guy.
The first one. But you will be that guy.
Yeah, I know. It's just like, it's one of those things where I'm like, I know I'm not going to enjoy it as much as people have hyped it up. And I actually have, weirdly, the exact opposite. If I go into a movie expecting it to be bad, I tend to come out really enjoying it.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of a good example of that. Like, I do legitimately feel like this is a good movie and, like, people just trash the shit out of it. But Speed Racer from 2008 is an awesome movie that's surprisingly strong. It's, like, a really solid script overall. And I think, like, it's just a really fun roller coaster ride of a film with a really good, solid plot. But people hate that movie, and I don't know why. I guess it's because they think the Wachowskis should have done better. Or I guess to jump up, you have a film like The Matrix, which has a lot of obsession over it, and people call just the original, not even looking at the sequels, like the original is a really great film. But I don't think that stood the test of time at all.
Wow.
Like, I think, 15 years later, let's call it, that movie is significantly weaker because the visuals don't hold up, the story doesn't really hold up because it was ruined by the sequels in a lot of ways, and any philosophy student will tell you that the whole thing's just fucked.
I was going to say something because, like, for me, that movie that everyone trashes that I actually think is really, really, really good is Last Action Hero.
Okay. I've seen reviews and people talk about that. I'm like, I'm really tempted to watch it, but I just don't know if I should.
Yeah, it started off as a parody of an action movie, and then they wanted it to be a legitimate action movie, so it's bizarre, but I think it's really funny. It's kind of immature, but there's some clever stuff about it, and there's some meta stuff that I'm just really weak for meta stuff. I like that stuff a lot.
Yeah, meta stuff is always fun. I just watched, speaking of movies that I think get a bad rap, I watched Looney Tunes Back in Action, the movie. I was pretty happy with that one. That holds up pretty well.
I remember seeing a trailer for that.
It's surprisingly fun. It's got, the animation's really weak at some points, especially when it's, 10 years or so after Who Framed Roger Rabbit, but I'm still pretty happy with it. Writing-wise, it's really sharp. Anyway, we're not here to review random movies that we've seen. No, but I do feel that way. Like, some things just do get kind of trashed by their reputation, whether they deserve it or not. Because, like, I feel like people go into a Speed Racer movie going, there's no way this could possibly be good. I'm going to nitpick everything wrong with it and just point out all the flaws because I'm not going to allow myself to enjoy this.
Right.
And you have the exact opposite where people are like, so hyped up, oh, it's one of the greatest movies ever made. There's nothing wrong with it. It's perfect. I love Dark Knight to death, but, I mean, there's some stuff in there where I'm kind of, iffy on it at best.
Yeah.
I'm not a particularly big fan of Maggie Gyllenhaal's acting.
Me neither.
Like, she's not terrible or anything, but she's kind of like the weak part of that cast. And so there's stuff here and there where I've got issues with it. You can complain about the voice all you want. I really don't care. How about you?
So this might seem a little off topic, and I apologize, but one of the big elephants in the room when it comes to this subject is, for me anyways, is Birth of a Nation.
Oh, God.
It is excessively racist. It is extremely racist, like uncomfortably racist. It is like...
Well, it's a, propaganda film for the Klan.
Yeah, it is. But it's still an excellently made movie. DW.
Everyone, you've heard it here. Connor Nielsen supports Birth of a Nation.
No, but when you look, so let's look at the American Film Institute's top 100 films, like 99 versus their '08 list. Like, D.W. Griffith made Birth of a Nation, and what it did though was like it invented cross-cutting. Like I mean, it's a very uncomfortable movie, but let's not pretend like it didn't invent cross-cutting. And then in the '08 list, it was more or less replaced with Intolerance, which is another film directed by D.W. Griffith from that same era. And, people always kind of see it as his apology for Birth of a Nation, which is kind of a cool idea. And then Birth of a Nation is nowhere on that list. And it's like, I understand why you're not putting it on there, but let's not pretend like it didn't, it doesn't have incredible sets, really good score, like it's impeccably.
But at a certain point, the story and the values being portrayed have to reflect on the film. Because, unless it's just a technical list, because, if it were a technical list, you'd have to put Avatar on there, and I don't think that movie particularly deserves to be on any greatest films list. That's not technical based only. And don't get me wrong, I'll actually defend Avatar more than most people will, because, the story is there to provide a canvas for the world to be explored and for all the CG and technology to be explored. And it's supposed to be something to just ground you and let you take it seriously to an extent. Whereas people act like the story is supposed to be, the biggest part of the movie, and it's not. That's not the focus. There are movies where story is more the focus, and this is a movie where the cinematography and the effects work is more the focus. Yeah. So with a film like Birth of a Nation, it may be important from a technical aspect of film, from, editing, shot setup, set design, all that stuff. But when the story and the values that the film is preaching become so completely toxic to where most of society is nowadays, it's hard to justify that still being on the list for what everyone will argue are only technical achievements. Because I don't think I've ever heard anyone argue for that movie's story. People just talk about the technicality behind it.
Yeah, that is entirely true. Now, I'm actually one of those people, though, where, and I know a lot of people do disagree with me on this, I do look at a lot of technical stuff, and I do think that a film, I know Spectre just came out and a lot of people don't like it. I will admit that movie's logic completely falls apart, but it's too well made to be a bad film. And I feel like, as far as Avatar goes, I think it's a decent movie. I think as far as spectacle goes, it gets a positive reaction out of me. And I agree that, it's world exploring. Its story, as you said, is a canvas to explore the world. It's kind of whatever, at best.
It's certainly been done before, and there's nothing wrong with that. There are worse things to base your main story off of. It could have been a big misunderstanding plot or something.
Oh, yeah.
So no, there's like the story, and I think Avatar is just a much more comfortable example than Birth of a Nation, Connor.
Let's go with Avatar. That is much more relevant.
Like, Cracked, I don't know if you watch any of their stuff at all, but they recently did a video talking about how Avatar and James Cameron is more of just a science project than it is an actual movie. Because really, that's what Cameron does with all his things, is he wants to do some kind of huge technical thing that the technology doesn't exist for, so he decides to make a movie in order to get the technology invented.
Yeah.
And then once it's invented, he makes the movie, and the story might not be the most important part of that. And that's okay, because that's not the part he's focusing on. And I don't know, if people will always justify a good story over a poorly shot film. People always make that argument. It's like, oh, well, the film, the way it's shot, sure, it's distracting and it's annoying, but the story's so good, you gotta allow it. I don't know why that argument seems to be looked down upon for the reverse, when the story's just okay, but the visuals are what you're going there for.
Right. And I think the general people who are watching movies, they don't look at the directorial intent, and some people don't even, even when they are dissecting film, they don't look for directorial intent because they just want to see what is being conveyed, guess at what was the intent. And I'm always the kind of person who I try to do both. I try to have my cake and eat it too, but it's a little impossible to do that sometimes. Like, what I'll always do is, now that I'm kind of writing reviews that have not been published yet, not published, but uploaded into a video. What I wanted to, I watch a movie a couple of times through, and then I'll kind of write out what I think the director or what the screenwriter or whoever's making it was going for. And then I'll watch it with commentary, and then I'll watch it with, the bonus features, and kind of look at what was the reason behind, what was the intent. And then I'll kind of go back and write a second review, and then I'll try to, combine them as best as I can. So I do think directorial intent or, screenwriter's intent, I think that is important, though.
No, for me, I'm always more of the author's dead kind of guy.
Oh, okay, yeah.
I never care what they were trying to do. I care what they delivered, and I mean, you can look at the intent, and that can help you get an insight into what they were trying to do, and then you can decide whether or not they succeeded on that. And I do think that Avatar, as a technical achievement, was a resounding success, and that's clearly all he was trying to do, because there's no attempt to really push the story over the visual elements. I mean, there are shots in that movie that last for days. It's not like Moulin Rouge, where it's a beautiful looking film, but the story just takes up so much of it that they don't even have time to focus on a beautiful shot for more than 5 seconds. Yeah. So you can hit a movie like Moulin Rouge for that, whereas with Avatar, there are just these big sweeping shots that just last for days, it seems like, because they want you to focus on all the little detail and just be absorbed by the visual element, especially when you see it in 3D, because he did a lot to make that a necessary part of the film. Not that all 3D movies do that, not that most 3D movies do that. But that was an important element in the thing, and I think that gets overlooked because people only want to focus on the story. I've yet to hear... Actually, no, I take that back. I've only heard one argument about the visuals being a problem in Avatar, and that was from someone who was a World of Warcraft fan, and they were annoyed because it looks too much like their game, and they just want to be playing it as opposed to sitting passively watching. That's the only argument I've ever heard against Avatar's visuals.
That's weird.
It's an odd one. But yeah, so the visual side of things can be important, but at the same time, I question, I guess, this is a bit of a transition, I question how much you can stake in with my earlier argument about standing the test of time and being just as effective in the future or in the now as it was when it came out, because King Kong did the same thing. The original 1938 King Kong did the exact same thing, whereas the visuals at the time were astounding and legitimately shocked the hell out of people. But now that clearly doesn't... if I were to tell you that's actually a giant monkey, you'd look at me like I was a crazy person. And because obviously it's a giant ape, Ian, God. But no, clearly the visuals of that don't stand the test of time, so it's not... that is a movie that was more important for developing those techniques that were later improved upon till we're at where we are now, as opposed to a film that, is as believable today as it was back then.
Yeah. I do really like the original King Kong, though. But I do recognize that there are things that are more important for pioneering stuff, and wasn't King Kong the first movie to didn't that movie invent rear projection?
I'm not sure off the top of my head. It may have. I wish Bill were here. He'd know. He's in love with that film. No, but that really is one of those things where I feel like that movie's more important for what it paved the way for as opposed to anything it did, because the story isn't fantastic. They even had to make fun of the story at one point in the new movie, or in the Peter Jackson film. Not that that movie has much ground in making fun of stories.
Right. So I got another question for you, kind of regarding things. We when you talk about a quality story and whatnot, and I do agree. Story is kind of the most important thing. I'm not trying. What?
I think it's a balance. I think it depends on what's working for the people, what the movie is trying to get across at the end of the day, and how people react to it.
Yeah, but what I mean is the audience is going to try to go for the story first more than anything.
Okay, yeah.
But when it comes to escapism, do you think that when it comes to holding up, so to speak, when it comes to when I think of escapism, my first mind is immediately Connery era Bond and Star Wars and Indiana Jones. Those are kind of my go-to ideas for what escapism is. Mostly kind of about the being entertained and about feeling excitement.
Mm-hmm.
And do you think that hold on.
Just grab the air around your head and push it back.
I mean, when it comes to
catch the idea.
In a historical context, do you think that these kind of escapist films are important, or do you think that being a product of its time is okay? I'm sorry. Wow, my train of thought is gone.
Well, I mean, I think Star Wars is always going to be important from a technical side of things, no matter what, because that movie did for not only just basic visual effects work, but also just for the idea of how people approach sci-fi. Because, I mean, everyone points to the cantina scene where everyone's where all the aliens are in the bar and you have all the different species and it's just going all past them, left and right. And so, you've got an entire world built that way, as opposed to if you watch sci-fi from relatively before that. I mean, I just got done. I'm working my way through Star Trek, and oh my god, I got so sick of every frickin' race being a goddamn human in the original series. And I mean, they improved with that over time on the show, but still, I mean, that's pretty much the universe of people with strange forehead bumps. That's pretty much all they do is just, we need an alien, well, they got a weird nose or some bumps on their head, that's it. And so, I feel like that, Star Wars helped push things technically, and it told a very classic story. I mean, it is the hero of 1,000 faces kind of thing that it's about, the hero's journey kind of story. So, I think that movie holds up as much today as it did, or not quite as much, because we've seen so much new stuff. But if you get it while you're young enough, I feel that movie still holds up today as opposed to as much as it did back then.
That actually sparks another question of mine, which is, do you think perspective is important on holding up? Because I know a lot of people who are like, man, Nightmare on Elm Street still holds up. And I don't think it necessarily, the original, really holds up all that well. But I know a lot of, when the perspective of people who, experienced it when it first came out, so they know what it was like when it's new. And so when it later down the line they're watching it, do you think it's that nostalgia or, those memories coming back to them of, oh my gosh, this is still holding up, versus someone who's kind of watching it for the first time and has seen the legacy of something and...
Well, see, Nightmare on Elm Street I have interesting feelings on, because I feel like part of why that movie was so successful is because it was both very much and also incredibly different from all the other horror films that were coming out at the time. Because, that was really the slasher era, and Freddy definitely fits in that category, but just the approach, especially in the first film, was so radically different than everything else. I've said this multiple times, and I feel like Freddy Krueger is almost more of a Japanese horror character than he is an American. Because there's certain things about the look of him, especially in that first movie, like when he's walking down that alleyway and his arms extend out to both sides to scrape the wall. So yeah, but I don't think that it holds up well as if you were to say this movie just came out last week.
Right.
Just like someone somehow has never heard of Nightmare on Elm Street and you told them that this particular film came out a week ago. I don't think they'd buy it. I don't think that they'd be able to get into that mindset. I think part of what made Elm Street so good was how refreshing it felt compared to all the other schlock.
And it's also really fun, too.
Yeah.
Craven is a surprisingly fun filmmaker.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's a scene in New Nightmare that... what?
I actually... It was funny that you did that film when you did, because I'd seen it probably maybe, 2-3 weeks before you did your review of it. And that was the first time I ever saw it. That was the one Nightmare film I hadn't seen.
I really like that one. But what I was saying was, needles freak me out. Like, they freak me out. And so there's that part where the babysitter and the doctor are kind of acting like they're going to hit each other with needles. And the whole time I'm like, stop.
Well, what was it, the third movie where his claws turn into the hypodermic needles?
I've only seen the Craven Nightmare films. I've only seen 2 of them.
Oh, there's one movie where, someone was a drug addict who is, in rehab or whatever, and when he gets her into the dream world, his claws turn into hypodermics filled with heroin, and he just, injects her all over the place, so... Oh my god, people, I wish you could see Connor right now. It's awesome.
Things don't scare me. Needles scare me a lot. Man. Ooh.
Yeah, I've seen all the Freddy Krueger movies, though, until recently, except New Nightmare, but now I've seen them all. No, but I do see where you're coming from, though, because certain, things in those films do seem to, the original seems to be really refreshing, but I think the new one, or I think New Nightmare really stood out, and again, in a way that the original didn't, and really made the idea of it just absolutely terrifying again.
Yeah.
The only thing I can think to compare it to is Cabin in the Woods.
Which I have not seen yet, and I really want to, but
everyone
spoiled it for me, so I already know everything about it.
That's too...
It's like Zombieland. Everyone's like, there's a Bill Murray cameo, and this is everything he does. Man, it really sucks when people spoil that kind of stuff, and I'm like, I haven't seen it. They're like, oh, sorry. So, I know everything about Zombieland and Cabin in the Woods, and I've seen Zombieland. I haven't seen Cabin in the Woods.
Yeah, Cabin in the Woods, it's almost not worth watching once you know the spoiler. It's still really good, but it's almost not worth watching at that point. It's like, hey, we're going to have a surprise party. Well, I guess I still get to have the party, but you kind of ruined part of it there. Anyway, what were we talking about with Nightmare anyway? I forget how we got to
I was just saying that I felt like, people who watched it when it first came out still feel it holds up. And I still think it's a really fun movie, and I really like it. There's stuff that kind of freaks me out, but I don't think it necessarily holds up that well. I think if you're kind of watching it with an 80s mentality, then you're going to have a great time at it. But if you're like, this needs to succumb to the norms of 2015 horror movies. If we're going to watch it and compare it to other horror films today, it's a masterpiece, but,
Ouch.
Yeah. Oh my god, did you see the Lazarus Effect?
No, but we just did Horror Month, and It Follows was the newest one we talked about, and that was really good.
Oh, I really liked It Follows. I really liked It Follows.
Yeah, that was a very freaky movie. You should have, just because, so Steve was on that episode, and he was talking about when he saw it in the theater, and, for some reason or another, his theater was empty, and while he was watching it, some person just kept walking into the theater and then walking back out. I'm like, oh my god, that's the worst possible way to watch that movie.
Was it like an usher going in and doing a theater check? Just to
Probably. probably still. That's like the worst possible experience to have while watching that movie.
That is.
So anyway, Connor, I did not realize you were a horror fan.
I'm actually not. I mean, Psycho is one of my favorite films ever. It doesn't scare me at all, but I love that movie to death.
Mm-hmm.
No pun intended. I've seen, Halloween. I've seen Friday the 13th. I've seen Nightmare. I've seen New Nightmare, and I try to watch all the contemporary horror films. I try to see everything that comes out. Period. So. I've seen more Paranormal Activity movies than I've wanted to, because I hate those movies. But
yep. Let's use that to jump back on topic here, shall we?
Yes.
Paranormal Activity is, to get back to the hype thing even, is something that does not hold up at all immediately out. Like, maybe the first one holds up kind of, but still. After you know what the premise is, there's a ghost and it's all shot like, guerrilla style, then it just falls apart after that.
Yeah.
It's got nothing else to hold on to.
Right. Because most of that movie is just dealing with, what is it? Is it nothing? Is it like a ghost? And then you realize, it's a demon! Of course it's a demon. But, yeah, so once the cat's out of the bag with that, it's just like, oh, it's a demon. There's nothing humans can do to stop it. Okay. I guess one of my, last question that I had prepared was, I had questions prepared, ladies and gentlemen, and sorry.
Wait, an impromptu conversation.
Yeah.
You must be real fun at parties.
No, I don't want to talk about that yet. That's next on the list. I just had a couple bullet points that I was trying to jog my memory on. Do you think there's going to be something from... I mean, let's put Avatar off the table and, Dark Knight off the table. But do you think there's going to be something that's kind of come out in the last, let's say 5 to 7 years that is going to be important, that maybe... that you think does deserve... that is top quality, or do you think it's just kind of important on a technical level that won't necessarily hold up?
Nothing's come to mind immediately, but there have been a lot of good... We've been in a pretty good overall era of filmmaking lately, and I think, a lot of that came from Dark Knight, though, is why it's hard to take that film off the table, because Matrix tried to do, an action movie that had some meat for you to think about it on, but it really failed in that the intelligence, quote unquote, behind it doesn't hold up. Whereas a film like Dark Knight, I feel like it perfected that idea of doing a really bombastic blockbuster style action movie that actually, had a lot of character and had a lot of intelligence behind it.
Right.
So once you take Dark Knight off the table, I'm trying to think of something I feel holds up well enough, and
right.
I really like There Will Be Blood, but that didn't even get Best Picture, even though it was totally robbed by the Coen brothers' stupid Western.
Well,
I like No Country for Old Men, but that was not the best film of that year.
Well, okay, then I guess my thing was actually going to be No Country for Old Men.
Really?
Yeah. I think, as far as importance goes, we live in an era where, there's it's kind of a cliche at this point where, people just say, oh, everything that can be done with the Western's already been done. And so to kind of make a Western that was contemporary, but it was also had some old school style of filming, and, there's not very much dialogue. A lot of long takes, an absence of a lot of music. And, there's just no music in that movie, is there?
There very, very little.
Yeah. And so, but it also kind of started there's the character of Anton, and it kind of has a very dreamlike quality about it, and it's kind of more emotionally driven than it is logic driven. And these people, especially Anton in particular, he embodies an idea more than anything. But I don't think he's all that great. But I think what it kind of done, kind of started Foxcatcher, I feel, is very, very influenced by No Country for Old Men.
See, I haven't seen that. I don't know, like, No Country for Old Men, I just don't feel like it's good on its own, though. I really feel like, I feel like it won Best Picture because the Academy's in love with the Coen brothers. Because, the very next year they released that piece of garbage, Burn After Reading, and that got nominated for Best Picture.
Did it? I got it.
Yes, it was on the nomination list for Best Picture. And that was a piece of garbage. I can't even tell you what the plot was. But so No Country for Old Men, I just didn't have, I enjoyed it. It just wasn't better than the stuff that come out at the same time, because that was a really strong year. If I remember it correctly, it was No Country, There Will Be Blood, and I want to say Michael Clayton. The George Clooney movie.
Yeah.
That was a really strong year, and I don't feel like that should have won.
Okay, Burn After Reading wasn't nominated, but The Reader was.
I could have sworn Burn After Reading was nominated for Best Picture. Maybe I might be mixing up my awards it was nominated for.
The word read is in both titles, so.
Yeah. I don't know.
I get what you're saying. I don't particularly care a whole lot for that film, but I don't know. I've seen its influence kind of stretching across, and not necessarily like popular films, but more artourist films and more, like indie films and passion projects. Like there's a lot of like that bleak tone, and especially the way the colors look, and I feel a lot of films are kind of going after that style. So.
That's fair. But I don't know how long that'll hold up. That seems more like a fad. That seems like the artsy version of 3D to me. Because, 3D is, the big thing. Avatar did 3D, and then every movie for a good 2-3 years there was released also in 3D.
Oh my god, 2010 and 2011.
Yeah.
Everything was in 3D.
Even fucking Thor was in 3D. You know what? I remember 2 shots from Thor that were actually in 3D. It was the tower spire thing that Natalie Portman works out of.
Yeah.
That tower was in 3D. And Thor flying towards the camera with his hammer was in 3D one time. There's so many bad 3D conversion movies where, you couldn't even tell. And, the only way I could tell that most movies were in 3D was to sit in the front fucking row.
Did you see Ghost Rider 2?
No.
I saw that in the theaters in 3D. I felt like I paid extra money to look at a flat screen with glasses on. There was no 3D in that movie at all.
Yeah, 3D was that big craze for a while, and it certainly helped ticket sales, at least temporarily. And but it's kind of dying out slowly, where, movies tend not to be released in 3D as often because people just don't care anymore.
Yeah.
I ended up seeing Man of Steel in 3D, and I really wish I hadn't, because I just thought I was going to see it in IMAX, not in IMAX 3D. But that, there's a lot of stuff like that where it was like that left and right, and it got really annoying and really tedious after a while. But then there's, and so that idea of kind of taking inspiration from the Coen brothers thing, I feel like that's going to be more of a fad that'll die out than something that'll last.
Yeah, but isn't kind of all of movies that way too? Something's really kind of popular, or it makes a big impact and kind of starts influencing a fad. Let's look at Star Wars. Throughout all the 80s, every studio wanted to have a Star Wars. Star Wars.
But Star Wars itself transcended all that and is still more important. It certainly set a trend, but then after that trend died out, it was still popular after the fact.
And I feel that same way about No Country for Old Men. My dad is 50 years old right now, and I remember when he first saw it, he's like, that's one of the greatest films I've ever seen in my life. And everyone I know that's kind of in that age range really feels that way. And you ask them about No Country for Old Men, they talk about it as it's just this very important film that kind of came out, and I feel like it is going to stick around, regardless if I like it that much or not.
See, I don't... it might stick around a little bit. I mean, it's hard to get rid of a movie that's won Best Picture. But at the same time, like, I just don't feel that it's been as impactful and it won't, like, shape cinema. Like, Star Wars, a lot of movies started coming out that were clearly trying to do the same thing as Star Wars. I've considered doing, I guess what you'd call it is clone projects, and you see that all over the place. Like, you know, everywhere from comic books to movies, and everything has that, where, like, something will be the starter project, and then something else will come out at the exact same time. I think TV probably has it the worst, to the point where I honestly cannot remember which show came out first that I haven't watched yet.
Yeah.
But, no, like, I feel like No Country for Old Men will stick around on its own, but it hasn't influenced film itself enough to really count as being important. Because, like, Star Wars, it influenced a number of movies, tried to copy the formula and everything, if you will, but it still stayed popular, and it started going off and doing other things within itself after that. Whereas... And it also influenced cinema, because suddenly it wasn't, okay, everyone has to have their Star Wars now. Now it's like everything sci-fi has to feel diverse. There's no more room for, it's just, aliens are just people in space. Like, everything had to have a world built around it, as opposed to just a simple premise to tell, like, a moral tale. And not put enough effort into it.
Okay. Yeah, you're kind of winning me over on this argument.
Whereas No Country, like, I feel like maybe some of the techniques and some of the understated stuff will stick around for a while, but eventually something will come around that gets more bombastic and everything again. So.
Well, and I got a question. Like, I know as people, especially like in my age range, I'm not sure how old you are, but, like, I'm 20 right now, and I know people who are, like, 20, 21, 22, 19, 18, whatever. And I have a prediction that Wolf of Wall Street is going to be a very influential film in a couple years. When, like,
I've still yet to see that.
That movie had, like, I mean, I don't know. Have you talked to Ben yet?
Yeah, briefly.
That is his favorite movie ever.
Really?
And I know when that came out, like, a lot of the older critics were like, oh, it's just gratuitous stuff, and it only has like a 70-something% on Rotten Tomatoes right now. Like, people are just kind of like, it's whatever. But I know, especially people in my age range, are just like, oh my god, and maybe it's because they don't exactly have a lot of, experience with Scorsese. Like, they don't know Goodfellas. And
Goodfellas.
Wolf of Wall Street is it's in the same vein as Goodfellas, but it's about like, it's kind of for the 21st century. It's not like about gangsters. It's about stock market. It's about...
So it's about crooks.
Yeah, I mean, it's about crooks, but not...
Is that all Martin Scorsese does, is make movies about criminals?
Unless it's Hugo, but... yeah, all of them are just about criminals. But I have a feeling that one's going to be very influential as well. Like, I think that people are... Same way, like, Goodfellas was very influential. Like, I mean, David O. Russell's American Hustle, which, funny enough, came out the same year as Wolf of Wall Street. It's just David O. Russell doing his best Goodfellas.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah, I don't know. Like, I haven't seen Wolf of Wall Street. It looks interesting. I don't know. I don't have any patience to watch films about stockbrokers, I guess. American Psycho already did it, I guess.
It's 3 hours of just non-stop energy. Like, it goes by.
Wow.
I mean, it's just non-stop, like, shouting and wow, and, like, quick edits, and I'm not quick edits, but it's edited, and that thing just moves like you would.
Gotcha. No, I just haven't gotten around to that yet. But at the same time, it's like, I'm not sure where I'm going with this, but, follow me down the rabbit hole for a sec. At the same time, I don't feel like that movie has had enough of an impact, because I feel like it kind of came and went, and so maybe people that saw it at the time will kind of spread it. It might get a second life, but, I don't think that movie really wowed people the way Goodfellas did, because Goodfellas was huge, I remember. I wasn't around for it, but I know, like, I read up on the impact of that, and I mean, you can see it in the way that cinema tried to copy it for the longest time. You know, it tried to do the Star Wars thing, but it also influenced the tone of gangster movies after that. Because, you know, there's obviously going to be exceptions, but almost up until that point, everything that, like, involved gangsters was pretty stereotypical. Like, oh, there's a...
trying to rip off Godfather.
Yeah, that's true.
So.
That's true. I don't know. I guess I'm not well versed enough in mafioso movies to talk about this too well, but I just feel like even Godfather, just the tone I got from that compared to the tone that... Because like, when Godfather came out? 70s?
72.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Because I feel like even Godfather tried to cash in on the Goodfellas thing, because Godfather 3 came out in the 90s, right?
Yeah. Oh, wow. Yeah, I didn't think about that. You're right.
And like everything was trying to be like Godfather with, you know, the it's very Italian. There's like, you know, the fat guy eating meatballs, and Goodfellas just made it more gritty and down to earth and real, and not like in a, you know, Frank Miller gritty, but like in a Seven Samurai kind of way where it's just fucking brutal.
Yeah. Well, it's funny we talk about Godfather 3 and Goodfellas. They came out the same year.
Oh, which one first?
Oh, they're probably in production at the exact same time. I gotta look into that. But sorry, as you were saying about like Seven Samurai.
Yeah, like, well, the Seven Samurai's got that very, you know, just down-to-earth, realistic brutality where it's almost hard to watch, just because of, like, it's not like, you know, you think a movie called Seven Samurai, it's going to be kind of like, you know, people flying through the air, cutting off arms and blood going everywhere, and it's not. It's like, you know, they chase a guy into a village, beat the crap out of him, and then some old lady comes and hits him with a stick until he's dead. So it's just brutal, and that's what Goodfellas felt like, where it's just, there's no romance to it at all. It's just really freaking harsh.
Well, and to answer your question, Goodfellas came out like 2 months before Godfather.
Okay.
3.
So I guess that might not be like the best example, but like everything was trying to do... Yeah, everything was trying to do Goodfellas for a while there, because that was like... Casino was out at the same time. Like, they even made an airplane-style spoof of, you know, the whole Mafia craze. Watch the movie Mafia. It's pretty freaking ridiculous.
Well, I mean, Casino is funny. That's like Scorsese trying to do Goodfellas all over again.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of stuff. Like, that was the era of the mob movie, I guess. And I don't know, maybe Tarantino had a hand in that too. But,
yeah. Well, I mean, that was around the time Reservoir Dogs came out, or was Reservoir Dogs a couple years later? Maybe that influenced Reservoir Dogs.
Maybe, or maybe that's what finally got Reservoir Dogs greenlit, who knows. He was doing a lot of crime stuff for a while there. Like, right now, all he seems to want to do is westerns.
Yeah.
Okay, so... I do feel like you have those clone projects that come out, and I think that can fool you into thinking a movie is more important than it might have been. I think what really makes the movie important, not necessarily good, is how it carries on through time and how it influences the medium, whereas opposed to it can also be important and good if it influences the medium, but throughout all that, you can still watch it now, and it feels just as fresh and unique and interesting.
Have you seen Stanley Kubrick's The Killing?
No, The Killing is one of his films that I haven't seen, but I am a pretty big Kubrick fan. And I mean, you want to talk about movies that are important and do stand the test of time because you'll never see anything like them again.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I mean, 2001 is mindfuck.
It is. It looks incredible. And of course, like, it translates so well today as well.
Yeah, and like and you want to talk about things that try to rip it off completely. The first Star Trek
Yeah.
movie. Oh my god, I have no idea how Kubrick didn't sue the shit out of them.
So he just didn't care. He's like, whatever.
Like, oh my god, I'd never seen the first Star Trek movie, and then I watched it recently, and I'm like, oh my god, why didn't Kubrick sue the hell out of these people?
Yeah.
Like that scene with Spock going through that tunnel thingy or whatever.
Right.
It's like, oh my god, it's the exact same thing. Anyway.
But The Killing is one of those films that it's kind of like an opposite where like no one remembers it, but it's so influential and kind of like you know the movie, you just never seen it before.
You have that. A lot of his stuff has that. I mean,
Right.
2001, everything's done the bum bum and then the apes and all that. Like everything has done that shit.
But what I'm talking about is like The Killing is almost like in a less like everyone knows what 2001 is. You know, that's like the marketing people. So like people bomb. Like you watch The Dark Knight. I can't believe we keep going back to Dark Knight so much. But at the beginning, the Joker's wearing that clown mask. You watch The Killing, and they go and rob the horse track money area. I'm pulling a blank on what they called it, like the cash room. And the guy wears a clown mask that looks exactly like that. Comes on.
That's weird because I've always heard that the clown mask was inspired by something Cesar Romero wore on the '60s show at one point.
Maybe that is, but like you have to look at that mask. Like the nose and the ears are like identical, and it's crazy. And then look at like the whole structure of The Killing it's a non-linear heist film. So like I mean that's at a time when non-linear storytelling was not exactly very popular as it is. So when you look at Reservoir Dogs, I mean I think I heard Tarantino said like that was one of the more influential films for that film. For The Killing was a very influential film for the Reservoir Dogs.
Reservoir Dogs.
Yeah, because
yeah, it's interesting because I mean Tarantino gets that a lot, where it's like, oh, he's basically just remaking every other movie and just taking all the good parts and putting it into one film. Like he gets accused of that a lot, and I think he does enough unique things, particularly in how strong his dialogue is.
Yeah, and he has a style with the camera and of course with his dialogue.
Yeah, like that's my favorite thing about Tarantino's movies is people are actually kind of talking like people actually do, and then shit just happens. It just suddenly goes wrong out of left field. That's always great. Death Proof's probably the quintessential example of that, where no one does anything. There's no character flaw that leads to this event happening. Shit just goes wrong. No, but like, it's interesting because you do have a lot of films that seem to be drawing from other things. So you always wonder, at what point is there no uniqueness in a medium, and it's just a snake eating its own tail.
Yeah, that's true. Everything is derived from something because of influence is just inescapable, and every storyteller learns stuff from another storyteller, and you know.
Yeah, and yet I don't think that there's known unique ideas. Like in everything, there's always something that you're bringing to it. It's just how much you're pushing beyond that, beyond your influences to put yourself into it. And so that's almost a different thing, though.
Yeah.
It feels like a different debate.
That is a different debate.
All right, so we've talked a lot about movies. Do you want to move on to like a different genre or medium or whatever?
Yeah. Movies are just kind of where I'd go. I know some people would want to stab me for saying this, but Batman Year One is another one that's really, really important. It's good.
What got you into... When did you read Batman Year One? Let me ask you that.
It was one of the first comics I read, and so I understand what it did for like Commissioner Gordon, and I mean, I think it's a great Gordon story, but the stuff is just so... It was just kind of bare bones. I'm going to do this so no one has to go through what I did. Take this tree over. And so I was like, okay, but then when you get to, like, the hard-boiled, like, Gordon stuff, like, that's great stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm even, like, I'll even advocate, I love Mazzucchelli's art in that book, and I know a lot of people really don't. But as far as, like, Miller's Bruce Wayne and Batman sort of goes, I just, like, it's pretty bland, but the Gordon stuff really makes up for it for me.
Yeah, and part of that is, yeah, Year One was after Dark Knight Returns. Part of that is just Miller already wrote a really great Bruce Wayne at that point. And so, yeah, I do agree though. I think Year One is more important for what it did for Batman, because, you know, before Year One, the public perception of Batman, for Year One, Dark Knight Returns, and eventually Batman 89, the public perception of Batman was Adam West.
I know, I know that.
Yeah, so that's why those things are more important, and I would say, yeah, all of Miller's stuff is more important than it is good.
I'd say all of his
actually
stuff. Yeah, I love Sin City.
yeah. I mean, like, his big seminal Batman works, you know, Dark Knight, Year One. Those are the ones that are more important than they are good, but they're still good enough. Dark Knight Returns is still a really good story overall, I think. I just think it's more influential than it is good.
Yeah, I really like Dark Knight Returns. I mean, whether or not, I'm as far as the whole politics stuff go, like, I don't know which way. I like that it's saying something, you know? It's trying to say something, and Miller is about as subtle as a chainsaw to the gut, but, I mean, he's at least saying something, and I like that Miller recognized that he's not subtle, so he at least just inserts himself in there. So,
yeah, and that is always the interesting thing about Miller is, like, it's hard not to read that and get a certain political perspective from it. But I don't know, like there are other comics that I'm trying to think of. Like, honestly, you ever read Action Comics #1?
The original Superman story?
Yeah.
Yeah, I have.
Like, that's clearly, like, even if you love it, even if, like, it does introduce a surprising amount of Superman's mythos in the first story of him, it's not a particularly great story or anything. It's just more important for creating this character and getting him in the world.
I really like the Golden Age Superman stuff a lot more than I like Golden Age Batman, because, I mean, it's just so much fun. There's no real, like, other part to it. It's just so much fun, and just got two guys going for broke trying to, like, make solid entertainment. As far as just pure entertainment goes, I think it's great, and there's stuff that gives a good chuckle out of me. But I do agree with you. It's not, like, one of the most amazing things I've ever read.
Yeah. I don't know. I just think there are a lot of, like, character stories like that where the fact that the story existed to create the character is more important than the story itself. In comics, I can pick that all over the place, and I feel like, you know, certainly with events, like, honestly, I think people just read events so they know what's going on in the universe more than they care about, like, the quality of the story or how it affects the character arcs of the characters they're reading in comics. Because, like, I don't really care about Convergence, and I actually managed to just say skip it. But
you're lucky.
Yeah, that's good news. I only read, like, 2 issues of the Wonder Woman Convergence, and then my comic shop's kind of finicky on stuff. So I read 2 issues of that, and I just really didn't care about the premise they were going for. It kind of sounded like a bad video game plot. And so I just decided not to read it, and it hasn't affected me at all.
Yeah, Convergence was just kind of something as DC's moving across the country. Let's just kind of put this thing out as a way of saying, oh, look this is how that story ended. Like, the Question story was kind of supposed to be an ending to the Greg Rucka detective. So, was it Greg Rucka?
I don't know. it's just one of those things where, like, I think events, and maybe I should have picked a more important event that, like, actually affected things, like, Infinite Crisis, that actually affected the universe as a whole for a while, or even Flashpoint, even though I liked that more than most people did. Flashpoint really did have a major effect on the universe, so, like, people read it, but it's still not, like, great or anything. It was a unique idea. To really go ahead and turn your entire universe into an Elseworlds story. But it wasn't a particularly good story.
Yeah. I haven't watched Flashpoint yet. I mean, I always want to because I love Andy Kubert, but I just haven't had the time to read it or money to buy it. So
it's all right.
Yeah,
you'd probably be okay watching the movie, and then any of this, like, the problem with the movie is they don't take enough time to focus on any of the individual stories they set up.
Yeah.
So your best bet would be to watch the movie, and then if you're really interested in any of the, like, individual story dynamics that they set up, then go read those.
Okay. But I mean, as far as Convergence goes, like, it was just kind of like, let's just kind of put these things in there, and this is kind of wrapping. They're trying to give, like, certain characters and timelines that never had a proper send off. And then, like, the main Convergence story, I have no idea what was going on. They're like, so world Earth 2, and then they come to this battle world. I mean, no, it's not Battle World. That's Marvel.
It is so weird that both of those universes, like, rebooting seemed so similar, isn't it?
That was hilarious.
I don't know how that happened. You want to talk about clone projects? There you go.
Yeah, but that one was like, no, we have Earth 2, and then there's a place called Telos, and then we got to have the planet becomes sentient, and this is Telos, and then it's the henchman of Brainiac, and then we got Brainiac, he makes bottle cities, but let's have bottle worlds, and let's bring them all into this one place, and then what do? Well, they fight because it's a comic book, and people like fighting, and oh man, it was like, it didn't know, it wanted to, like, constantly remind you of what the premise of all the tie-ins were, but it wanted to be its own thing, and it was trying to continue stuff from Earth 2, from, like, the New 52, which I didn't read, so you're kind of confused on that, and then they constantly are flashing back. It's a nightmare. You know who the Warlord is, right? That comic strip that ran for a while? No? Well, too bad, because he's part of this. So it was, yeah. Convergence.
That's unfortunate, because, I mean, I know a lot of people are really excited to get the old 52 back, and it's unfortunate they kind of squandered the opportunity then.
Yeah.
But yeah, you have a lot of events that seem to off and on change the history of the universe, but because you have so many of them happen, the quality of them is rarely good, and they end up just, either getting us back to status quo or, changing it very, very briefly, if at all.
Yeah.
I don't know, there's stuff like that, and, like, the thing that pissed me off the most about Flashpoint and New 52, I guess, is Batman Inc. got interrupted because of it.
Right.
And ultimately wasn't very satisfying to have in the New 52 since they made him change so much. And now we're putting Batman almost right back to where he was in the middle of Batman Inc. Well, not Bruce Wayne Batman, but Batman. So I don't know, it's all over the place with events seem to be, more important than they are good, and I feel almost entirely comfortable saying that, because, like, that's just the best case I can think of where, yeah, this is actually kind of important to the universe overall. You really want to get a full understanding of the DC universe. Unfortunately, you have to read this. You have to watch Superboy Prime punch the universe.
I'm sorry you have to read Amazon's Attack, but it's important to know what was going on at this time.
Yep.
I think as far as, like, comic books, it's easier to identify, like, that this issue was the introduction of both Vicky Vale and the Mad Hatter. Oh, okay. It's not that good of a story, but,
Yeah. It's weird because you'll, like, there are issues that are important, but at the same time, so much changes in comic books just radically. like, the original Black Mask is so different than what he ended up becoming before they killed him off. It's just, like, almost a completely different character, honestly. So you have a lot of that where it's just things change drastically over time. So you even question how important the actual story itself was, or just the fact that this is the book where this character was introduced.
Yeah, and as far as like important comics go, I think especially since the 2000s started, there's been a really, especially like Image and Vertigo, like creator-owned. I mean, not Vertigo's not, really creator-owned, but what I'm getting is like The Walking Dead and Why the Last Man, like very, very important comics in the way they like have influenced the medium as a whole. And yeah, I mean, like The Walking Dead's on TV. Like the Why the Last Man is going to be on TV sooner or later. I mean.
They must put every single comic book character and series on television.
Yeah, especially right now. There's so much.
And so much of it is not good.
Gotham broke my heart. Oh my god.
That was a stupid idea for a television series.
Oh no, but I mean, but when you hear Gotham and it's like, oh, it's about Gordon and Bullock, you're like, oh, so it's Gotham Central. Nope. Oh my god.
That was just a dumb idea. It's basically like, let's make Bruce Wayne's rogues gallery really, really old so it's not impressive when Batman beats him up.
This person's kind of like the Joker. No, they're just crazy. This person's kind of like, no, they're just crazy. Everyone's just crazy.
Yeah, I don't know. I didn't bother watching that. I watched like half of the first episode and that was it.
Yeah. That's kind of one of the better episodes too. So.
Yeah. No, just a lot. Like I think the one that pissed me off the most was Supergirl.
I watched Supergirl yet.
I watched the pilot and I could not get past the fact that they will not say Superman.
Oh, really?
It legitimately bothers me. They're playing the pronoun game with Superman, and that gets really old really fast. No, but there are a lot of movies like that, or not movies, comics like that, where it seems like what they're doing is pushing the medium and making the medium do things that it wouldn't otherwise be comfortable with. And everything's kind of a reaction to that. And that's been going on since the beginning, because like EC was the first one to do horror comics, and then everything followed suit for a while until the bridge kind of collapsed on that.
Yeah. And ultimately, like, the horror comics kind of died when the whole Comics Code Authority came out.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, EC was the first one to go.
Right.
But, I don't know, it's one of those weird things where, like, they seem important, but it's not outside of the medium. It's not very much outside of the medium, because, like, some of the big name characters and big, huge books will get, will branch out of comics and affect, other media like movies and television shows, but comics seem to kind of be in their own little world most of the time.
Yeah, it's more niche than anything I can think of. And it's like, to a comic book, customer, like, Grant Morrison's Arkham Asylum is like, oh yeah, I know what that is. But you're like, okay, here's this book called Arkham Asylum. They're like, is that like the video games?
That's the question I always hear people ask is, is the book like the video game? Like,
no,
besides them being in Arkham, besides them being in Arkham and inmates escaping, no.
Well, there's a lot of crucifixion symbolism, and there's a lot of...
Yeah, there's a lot of demon symbolism and madness and questioning Batman's character. Are there any cool fights? One?
The real one. Dave McKean's the artist, so it's just going to be a weird thing to look at.
Yeah, pretty much. But yeah, it seems like comics are always off on their own little world, and it's weird because anytime you're talking with someone about almost any franchise that is branched off into comic books, comics almost always get put in this realm of, well, they don't count because they're comics.
Yeah, and that bums me out because I'm a really big comic book guy. I really like the history of it. I'm surprised at how dramatic of a story the history of comics are, and yet no one really knows about it. It's crazy.
Yeah, I mean, my favorite story is, hey, did you know that DC Comics basically started out as a front to launder money? Like, that's the greatest story of all time. They started writing tales about superheroes who go fight mobsters as a front for the mob. That's brilliant. But anyway, comics, it always bothers me that comics do some really innovative, really creative stuff that ends up often with franchise things, let's say, being significantly better than things that tend to come out in the franchise. Like, I'm not a huge fan of the comics, and I haven't read too many of them, but from what I hear, the Alien vs. Predator comics are like a gajillion and a half times better than either of the Alien vs. Predator movies. But it's just this, well, comics don't count mentality, and like, I don't know why that is. It's like, why do comics not get to be valued? Because they're monthly? Because they're short? I just don't understand that.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, the only way, argument I understand is, well, I mean, they're serialized. Like, yeah, TV's serialized. And I think it's ultimately, the superhero comics never end. So it's, that's more off-putting to an audience than I think anything else.
Well, I remember going to the comic store with, a cousin that was visiting from out of town. He's like, oh my god, Ian, you read comics? I'm like, did you see... It was 2009, so I was like, did you see Iron Man, Dark Knight? And he's like, yes. Watchmen, yes. Okay, then shut up, because where do you think that shit came from?
Right.
All of it just comes out of the comics. So I don't understand how superhero movies can break box office. That's a hard thing to say for some reason. How superhero movies can constantly break the box office, but yet the comics, for some reason, are still kind of lame.
Right. One thing, and especially that's also noticeable because I took a class, actually, where Kelly Sue DeConnick was the teacher.
Mm-hmm.
She's, of course, writes Bitch Planet, and she wrote Captain Marvel for a long time. She's married to Matt Fraction and whatnot. So she taught the class, and she's been trying to bust into TV work for a long, long time. She was nominated she's been nominated 2 years in a row for an Eisner Award for Best Writer. She's considered one of the top writers in the industry, and she's married to what a lot of people consider to be the greatest writer in the industry right now. So... And I know, and if you look at Grant Morrison, whom I would argue would be the best writer ever for comics, I know a lot of other people would, and he's having real issues busting into film and busting into TV, and that's why he wrote Annihilator, with kind of vent out a lot of those frustrations. And so it's really interesting that everyone wants to pull stuff from the comic book world, but no one wants to actually take something from there. I think
they don't want to go out and actively participate in that, and that's weird.
And I think the only person who actually has made the jumping over point was Brian K. Vaughan to write for Lost, and eventually Under the Dome. So, yeah.
And those series suck.
I never watched Under the Dome, but Lost is a guilty pleasure of mine.
Okay. Whatever, you crazy person.
That's just soap opera.
Yeah,
he was a writer on that. Oh yeah, Paul Dini actually made it into television. And
yeah, Paul Dini. I mean, Jeff Johns is the consultant on Arrow and Flash. And you can tell because every single episode of Arrow opens with "My name is Oliver Queen." Oh my god, if you read Jeff Johns' Green Lantern, you will.
I am Hal Jordan, Green Lantern of Sector 2815.
2814. Thank you very much.
2814. My bad.
Yeah, my name is Hal Jordan, Green Lantern of Sector 2814. Blah 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 blah. It's so hard to get through his run at times for me because every single issue opens with that.
Yeah.
And so, like, you can tell Jeff Johns has his fingerprints on it. I mean, that's a good thing to do, but I guess I prefer the Marvel way of doing it, which is to just have a page for that you can skip.
Yeah.
As opposed to trying to work it into the plot. But, I don't know. It's one of those things where, like, comics, I feel, are possibly the most important and influential art form that is out right now, and they just don't get the recognition they deserve.
I agree with that a lot.
Because everything goes back to comics, and, like, you know, the big complaint is, oh, well, there are no more original movies coming out of Hollywood. And I'm like, fuck it, who cares? We're getting all these awesome comic book movies.
Are you reading Paper Girls? Come on! And you know what's crazy is because I think, when especially we're talking about like importance, I guess we're still talking. We kind of gotten off that subject a little bit, but I think the thing about importance is kind of tied to history, and I feel like comics, really more than any other art form, really is kind of has a foot in its own history.
Oh, definitely.
Like video games are always trying to, new technology. How do we push the boundaries? You know what I mean? They're really trying to go for story now. A lot of them are, anyways. And then I should probably mention I'm not a video gamer whatsoever, so I have a very much of an outside looking in perspective on that.
Gotcha.
And then with movies, it's kind of all about like, well, what kind of trend can we do now? So yeah, but comics are really a lot of the great writers are really kind of have their foot into the history of comics, and like especially Grant Morrison, he's so referential of the story of comics.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, it is one of those crazy things because they're so aware of themselves at this point. Like everything, they constantly reference the good old days, as it were. Like I'm watching through Star Trek Deep Space Nine right now, and I recently watched the episode where they like time travel and go onto the original Enterprise with Kirk, and really great green screen work, by the way. But like, there's such a nostalgia to like these moments in this where like they're getting suited up in quote unquote the old Starfleet gear, so they put on like kind of the cheap shirts, and they get like the tricorder with the big strap, and they get out like the communicator that's kind of like a flip phone. Mm-hmm. And so, like, there's this music playing. It's all very nostalgic. I'm like, I can read that in a comic book almost every other week.
Right.
Like, I'm reading through DC Comics Bombshells. That's doing that right now in a really strange and interesting way. But, what was it? Justice League New Frontier did that. Like, that kind of reverence for what comics used to be is all over comic books. Oh, I'm going to come to your house and steal that.
For those of you listening, I am holding up the Absolute Edition of DC New Frontier. I love DC New Frontier.
I'm gonna go pummel you to death with my Absolute Sandman and then steal. You have no idea how frustrating things are. Can I just have all the Absolute Editions? Is that too much to ask for of everything?
Yeah. I love it. Sorry, I interrupted you.
No, it's fine. Like, comics are so referential to themselves that they're so aware and grounded in their own history that it's just absolutely fascinating to look into because, I mean, maybe that's why they're hard to get into is because it's this building continuity and everything is just so aware of what it's been built on that it's hard not to like have to read up on the history of it. It's hard to just jump into comics the way you do with like a movie, but people jump onto television shows all the time.
I think Multiversity was really, that was kind of, that's kind of what the whole premise of that is. Did you read Multiversity?
No, I'm waiting until I can get my hands on the whole thing. But yeah, I don't know. It's one of those interesting things. I feel like we're getting close to wrapping up here, right. But the idea of importance, and let's briefly before we wrap up talk a little bit about TV because that's kind of like the major thing that we've danced around a little bit, but I don't feel have addressed on its own entirely. Because like I was just talking about Star Trek, and that's what made me think of this. I think Star Trek, the original series in particular, but possibly the entire franchise, is a series that was more important than it ever was good. Like, TOS had some good episodes, some very, very sparsely populated good episodes.
Right.
But it is much more of an important series, I feel, than to the history of television, if you will, than it is just a good show. Because there's some stuff in that that's just terrible.
I've not actually watched. I watched the pilot of TOS. And that's
I'm sorry.
Yeah, I kind of liked it. You have to understand, I love goofy sci-fi stuff from that era. I really like it. Like my favorite. One of my favorite movies ever is Godzilla vs. Monster Zero. I love that. But anyways, and also my favorite TV show ever is the original Twilight Zone, which is
I like Twilight Zone.
Which is, insanely important series. I mean, Rod Serling's I think he wrote most of the first season by himself.
Maybe, I don't know. It's weird, my girlfriend had never seen, or, ever seen a reference to the dude outside the library.
Really? How do you go your whole life without seeing a reference to that?
I don't know, but I was able to show her the whole episode, and she was like, what?
Have you seen Jimmy Neutron, at least? I remember, I watched that episode, I'm like, oh my god, that's like that Jimmy Neutron episode. How do I know what Jimmy Neutron is still? So,
yeah, it's weird though, because a lot of things in television, it's really crazy how much studio involvement has affected the history of television. Because for years it was more important to have a status quo that you could get back to as opposed to any kind of developing story.
Right.
I'm trying to think of a good example of this.
I am not much of a TV guy, so the whole history of TV is something that's very, something I'm not familiar with.
Every sitcom did this. There was no character development, really, in sitcoms. It's just, you don't want it to be too complicated for people to just tune in and out of during, week to week. You want people to be able to skip a week and not be lost, is what a lot of TV came down to, sitcoms in particular. So when things have really moved in a very strange direction to become much more serialized and much more what's a good word, complex in the way they're telling their stories. Right. Whereas a lot of they're much less formulaic than it used to be.
Right.
And I think that's interesting is Breaking Bad is a series that people rave up and down about, and I think it's okay.
Oh, really? I love Breaking Bad. I was actually going to talk about Breaking Bad.
It's all right. I enjoy it for the most part.
That is one of the best episodes of TV ever.
Fair enough. It's okay. I enjoy it, but I think it's more important to driving this era of television of
right.
Long format storytelling, because it certainly isn't the first to do that, but it's one of the most popular to do that.
Yeah, I think AMC is really kind of, at least from the outside looking in, AMC, that channel, has really kind of been important into the whole getting us to a new golden age of television. Game of Thrones is on HBO, but Mad Men, The Walking Dead, and Breaking Bad, those three TV shows have all been on TV at the same time at one point.
Yeah.
And I think when that was happening, everyone was just like, what's AMC going to put out next?
Mm-hmm. And it's the joke for the longest time was that AMC was just digging through HBO's garbage bin. And that's somehow producing gold out of it, and that's not an unfair assessment. But at the same time, yeah, I feel like we are in a golden age of television. It's because they're learning from where they've been. That they're learning what people will actually be engaged in. Because that's where radio was right before it died out. Was, less of an episodic thing and more into these, it was a weird blend of episodic and serialized stuff. Wasn't as complex as TV has gotten lately, but it was certainly less formulaic, I feel.
All right.
I
was going to say, time to get into guilty pleasure time with TV, because reality TV was. You want to talk about important stuff like American Idol. I remember that thing's kind of run its course now, and I forgot it was a show. For the last 5 years.
That shit's still on?
Yeah, it was the final season, 2016. It's it's still a thing? That's crazy to me. But I remember watching that when it was new, and I remember watching when everyone was watching, and everyone was like, people knew if Simon likes you and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But then there's also shows like Survivor, which I still watch. I love Survivor. But, you look at those kind of things, and they're also very important because in the 2000s, there was this big reality boom.
Oh, my God. It was terrible. I can't remember whose joke this was, but I think it's one of my favorite summations of reality television. There's no reality left. We filmed it all. I love that joke because that's just how I felt. I'd never really gotten into the whole reality show thing. And some of them, it was weird because I liked game shows, but for a while there you couldn't watch a game show without watching a reality show too. They blended those two things for the longest time. 'Cause Survivor started out as a game show with the reality element twist.
Yeah.
And all these other game show type things just became reality shows, and so it just became more about the interviews and the drama behind the scenes as opposed to the actual games.
Oh yeah, I actually I never thought of it like that. I've always seen it as it's a reality show but with a survival twist, and I've always had a really soft spot for survival movies. Like that movie Unbroken that Angelina Jolie directed. It's not that great, but that middle segment where they're just on a lifeboat trying to survive is great. Even Alfred Hitchcock's Lifeboat. I love that movie. And that's why Everest is one of the most disappointing movies for me this year, because disaster movies are my least favorite kind of movie. And I was like, oh man, Everest is going to be a survival movie. And it was a disaster movie, and I was like, oh man. That's... So,
well, The Martian, that was good.
Yeah, that's a survival movie. I was like, man, this is what I wanted Everest to be. It's so good. Oh, I love The Martian. I get so excited when I talk about it. Yeah.
Yeah, but I don't know. I think TV's actually probably learned the best lesson from, capitalizing on what made stuff work. But I'm trying to think of, an example of a television series that was more good than it was important.
I know everyone talks about that one episode of that one show where it was all filmed in one take, and then it's about these two parents. I'm trying to remember what show it is, but
I don't even remember the show. I don't think I ever watched an episode of the show, but I know exactly what you're talking about, where they're trying to get their kid to sleep.
Yeah, and it originally aired with no commercial breaks. It's driving me crazy now because I remember seeing that everywhere a couple months ago.
Yeah. I don't know, is there a series that was it wasn't doing anything new or original, it was just really solid? Nothing's coming to mind for me right at the moment, but that's okay.
All right.
Connor, is there anything else you wanted to talk about?
Not really. I think this conversation really kind of went into a direction I didn't anticipate, but I really liked it, so...
Yeah, it's always a good sign. I'm sorry to disappoint you with your expectations of our conversations, Connor.
No, it was better than...
I'm sorry I didn't stick to your script, you bastard.
Oh, man, do you have any idea how many pages I wrote today? But, I don't really have anything more to add.
I remember with the first movie my friends and I made, I had a history teacher in high school watch it, and afterwards he asked me, Ian, was there a script? It's ouch. um,
There's
no,
never
like,
a script when you're 12.
oh, it was high school.
Oh, okay. I mean, there's never a script when you're in high school.
Yeah. I don't know. There's some interesting stuff that we've covered in this, and I do think it's always unique to look into when something has stood the test of time because of its value as opposed to its quality, or vice versa. So that's really, it's a very vast topic, and I'm sorry, but I feel like I reached my conclusion way too early in the video, as in like the first 2 minutes, which is, you know, if it really is better than important, then it'll be just as watchable now as it was back then. That's not the case with most important things.
Yeah, no, when you said that, oh crap! I'm gonna try to fight that, but I know he's right.
Okay. Well, everyone, thank you very much for watching. This is a lot of fun. Connor, you are welcome to come back anytime at all, my friend. Until next time, though, I'm the Philosopher.
And I am a cynical optimist.
Okay, then. And we are your Geeky Gentlemen, and we will be discussing things.